Põllupäevik.
Tere head kuulajad, on 22. mai, varajane pealelõuna, kell on 1, oleme salvestamas järjekordset Viljarösti ja täna nagu eelmises saates juba ka siia välja lubatud on siis ainult rapsikoogi ja rapsiõli teemaline saade peaasjalikult. Muidugi minuga on koos Saates Timo Silve, tere Timo.
Tere kõigile.
Nagu me eelmises saates saime teada, siis Timo on siuke reisinud mees, et tunneb igasugu kaugemaid inimesi ka kui siit Eestist ja on täna leidnud meile küll ühe väga huvitava külas, et äkki Timo ütled sina võib-olla kõigepealt selle isiku kohta mõned sõnad.
Meil on täna külas Per Villumsen, kes on siis rapsi seemnete maakler, ehk siis nii-öelda viib turu peal ostjad, müüjad omavahel kokku ja ta on teinud seda tööd juba aastaid ja mina kohtasin teda Baltika Aurasse tööle tulles, kui tema tegeles Scanola Taanis, siis kogu selle nii-öelda pressimise juhtimisega seal ja kogu see riskijuhtimine seal pool ja kogu seda nii-öelda infot ja abi ja õpetusteks meie Scanola algus ju väga palju Taanis sai, et ja eks sealt maalt oleme nii-öelda suhtlema jäänud ja nüüd on ta saanud nii-öelda selle valdkonna juhtiv spetsialist nii-öelda.
Leading expert. But hello, Mr. Per Villumsen, leading industry expert. Maybe you can say a little bit about yourself, who you are, what is your experience in rapeseed trading, and how have you come to this path?
Hello there. Thanks very much for those very kind words. My Estonian's still a bit rusty, so I'm sure Timo did a good pre-introduction. But yeah, I'm 47 and I call myself a rapeseed nerd, a rapeseed geek. I actually have a bit of a weird background. I'm not from this industry. I grew up on a farm, but more of a hobby farm in the middle of nowhere in Denmark. And I went to law school and then to trade university for a graduate diploma in business administration, only to realize that law was very, very boring. And then I got offered a job as a trader straight out of university, where I actually started in an international company that does a lot of oilseed crushing, and was on soft seeds from the beginning. So ever since 3 days out of university, I've started working with, at least to some extent, rapeseed oil, the crush. I later acquired an MBA from Henley Business School and then spent 10-15 years as a trader before joining the dark side and becoming a broker instead. But still for rapeseed, I've been brokering for almost 10 years, and the last 3 years in my own company, which I co-own with a business partner in Denmark. We're based out of Aarhus, and my trade experience was both in what is today known as AAK, on the trade floor, but also 7 years as commercial director of the Danish version of Scanola, which is part of the Danish agro group in Denmark today. So I've spent almost my entire career having something to do with rapeseed, one way or the other.
Must be really interesting since you have been in this industry for quite a long time now.
Yeah, I'm getting old. Thank you for noticing.
But let's go to the markets, which is the main thing that our listeners are hoping to hear today. Let's start with the global rapeseed production. Mm-hmm. How to see the production areas have shifted or moved? Do we see some kind of areas that are coming up in growing area and also in total production, and some areas going lower? And if you see that kind of shifts, then why are they occurring?
Short answer is no, not really. You will see shifts. They are mainly climactic based, but I think most of the advanced farmland where rapeseed is used is quite advanced. You don't see very much rapeseed production on previous rainforest stuff in South America. That's where you really is one of the few places in the world where you still really expand the agricultural area. But that's mainly used for soy and palm. So where you cut down previous forest is usually used for that. So rapeseed is more a part of traditional in the crop rotation. So you will more see shifts that are more interesting, are more between GMO and non-GMO, for instance. So the rapeseed we primarily use in Europe and grow in Europe is non-GM, but everything you grow in Canada, for instance, is canola, as they called it. Canadian oilseeds is literally the name where from canola comes. And that's a 100% GM variety. Australia has become an increasingly large rapeseed producer over recent years, not because of new farmland, but because rapeseed has taken a little bit bigger part of the crop rotation. So where a good crop in Australia some years ago was maybe a couple of million tons, primarily non-GMO, then a more average crop today, I would call something like between 5 and 7 million tons.
That's a really big leap.
It is, but that's 50-50 today. Maybe even a little bit more GM than non-GM. So whenever you hear about an Australian crop of 6 million tons, for instance, you think, okay, if Europe has a deficit, we can just import some Australian and we're all home free. But if we're already past halfway GM versus non-GM, then there's only maximum 3 million tons to export. You have a domestic crush, so an own use in Australia, which is almost 100% non-GMO of over 1 million tons. Then you're suddenly only at 1.8 million. That is a potential export. And the problem with those boats that sail towards Europe is they have to pass other countries, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, who are also some years very big importers of rapeseed and some years solely non-GM. So suddenly it's not just we can always be saved by Australia. So the most important part about rapeseed is it's a globalized product. It's a globalized world. We produce, I'm just going to make, broad average strokes here, somewhere between 80 and 90 million tons a year now. The last few years have been something like, depending on what statistics you use at, but 85 million tons last year. The year before that, around 89. So a decrease, but not a decrease because we're moving away from rapeseed, simply because of climatic factors. If it's bone dry in Australia, you will not be able to plant rapeseed, then you'll plant something else. Or if in Canada, if crop economics don't allow it, they can have quite big shifts year to year.
Yeah, in rotation.
Exactly, but also in money rotation. They will just go for some more wheat if it makes more sense for them. But so even if we had a 5% reduction between crop, you can call it 23-24, and last year's crop 24-25, the average growth over the last 10 years in rapeseed is 2%.
That's basically nothing.
So it is rather stable. I mean, we used to say somewhere between 75 and 85. Now we call it more like between 80 and 90 million tons a year globally. Out of that production, the 20% plus, last year was 22% of the world production, was Canada. The European Union, and we can add the UK to that, about 20% of the total world production. China almost have 20% as well. And then the rest is mixed up with quite some production in India, Australia, as I said, Russia does something, Ukraine, United States, so on. But the important parts for Europe, and that really affects the MATIF and the price that your farmers will be most interested in, obviously, is the European production numbers. And European is not just EU. European includes all the Black Sea originations, so that's mainly, of course, Ukraine, but also the smaller states, Moldova, Georgia, whatever there. And in 2024, that number, which is interesting there, was 21.8 million tons. That's EU, UK, and Black Sea countries, so we call that European rather than EU origin. Yeah. The expected number right now for 2025 is that the EU will do, including UK, about 20, and then the rest, so all of these other European countries, will be a little bit above 4. So the total number we're looking at is about 23.5 to 24 million tons. So
and how much is total crush in Europe?
And that is where it gets really interesting, because it depends on who you ask. And you will know it probably after the fact, when the official numbers come out from the European organizations, Mars and so on. But all through the year, this is a big guesstimate, because a lot of the rapeseed crushing plants in Europe are dedicated rapeseed crushing plants. So they will crush rapeseed almost no matter what. But a lot of them are switch plants. So the big companies, the ABCD companies we talk about in our industry, that's ADM, Bunge, Cargill, Louis Dreyfus, these really, really big international conglomerates, they have a lot of switching plants. That means if crush margins suddenly become much better for another oilseed like soybeans.
Or sunflower.
They will do that instead. Sunflower has a little bit less flexibility, because it's a little bit more, you do a de-hulling of sunflower seed, and those husks, they basically can self-ignite. So that's you need to know what you're doing if you crush. Exactly. You need to know what you're doing if you crush sunseed. But especially in the Iraq market, in the Benelux country, that's Amsterdam, Rotterdam, Antwerp, Ghent. They are the main receiving area for all the rapeseed that comes into Europe. And more or less all of it arrives there whether it comes from Canada, Australia, or Ukraine. It'll come into these places, and in these areas, alongside with some of the French ports and Hamburg, you have some really big oilseed crushers, and they can switch a lot of these guys.
But if you look at recent year, isn't that there's a more GM rapeseed used in Europe? So if you look at the coming crop, then of course Europe is net importer for the rapeseed. But if you use more GM, then we have more opportunities to get this extra what is needed into Europe. So on that picture, I don't see very big problems on the supply side.
Exactly. First of all, the crush estimate by most players I read from anyway, or most analysts, is around 25 million tons. So we need 25 million, but as I just said before, the expected number right now is close to 24. When we include the production in the European states, so that's Ukraine as well, but Ukraine exports by far the vast majority of their stuff into Europe. So it makes good sense to say that this is possible to get all of this into Europe. But even if we say we miss some of it, or maybe 500,000 tons go across land border somewhere else, whatever, we still have 23.5 million tons. So we only need to import 1.5 million. And now we're just talking rapeseed broad, that's both GM and non-GM. So far this season, we've already imported 5.8 million tons into Europe of rapeseed, and the total export is next to nothing, 300,000 tons or something, and that's actually going inside Europe, from Europe to UK. So it just used to be EU, but since they did Brexit, we now have them as an export statistic. But out of the 340,000 tons that have been exported, 297,000 so far have gone to the UK. So we are an importer in Europe. And we've imported 5.8 million tons this year already. That was no problem whatsoever. So no, I don't foresee it'll be a problem to import what we need in the coming crop year, whether we want GM or non-GM. Now, the issue with GM seeds in Europe is, of course, that we are predominantly non-GMO in our usage of rapeseed, and our own production of rapeseed is all non-GMO because of EU rules. However, Europe is not have no problem using GM material. Right, we import millions of tons of soybean meal that is GM that we use in our feed production every year. The problem is only for these guys to switch the usage of rapeseed, because of course if you have a strictly non-GM production because you're doing food oil for people, then it has to be non-GM. If you're producing stuff where the feed stuff also needs to be non-GM, of course you can only use non-GM. But we've seen this year that the price spread between GM seeds and non-GM seeds got bigger than it's been in many years, and that naturally has increased Europe's demand for GMO seed. You can say Europe learned how to use more GMO this year. So nobody knows how big the number is. The problem is you can't see it in import statistics. We've so far imported 2.5 million tons from Australia this season, but it doesn't say anywhere how much of that is GM or how much of that is non-GM. We can see if there's around 620,000 tons right now from Canada so far this season. We know that's all GMO, but the Australian we don't know. But I hear many market players whispering me in the ears that they expect, I think the previous record for any season ever used was about 1.5 million, maybe 1.7 million tons in a whole season used in Europe GMO. I hear players talk about we might hit 2.5 to 3 in this current crop year. So Europe has gotten smarter, you can say, or better to use this, or easier to switch it around to use GMO seeds. So this is going to be going forward. If we paint with a broad spectrum here, it all relates to geopolitics, because why have this GMO seed gotten so cheap? Well, the main problem was, of course, Trump's fight with Canada. And the Canadians starting to say, so we'll suddenly have... Normally, rapeseed is a global commodity that's not put under tariffs unless there's really some geopolitical things like the sanctions we put on Russia or something. Rapeseed moves freely. The vast majority of all Canadian, both product exports, so oil and meal when you've crushed the rapeseed, or rapeseed in itself, have gone to US. But when they started calling Canada our biggest enemy and whatever Trump was saying, of course some Canadians started to move elsewhere. And that has put a big push for GM seeds into Europe. And that's actually been the main story for the whole last year.
Yeah, because that pushes the inland prices lower in Canada, and rapeseed produced there can be much more competitive in further countries.
Exactly. But that's a thing that constantly moves. So all the traders in Europe are sitting, the big traders, they're sitting looking at the spread between Winnipeg, which is the exchange for rapeseed in Canada, and Matif, which is our European rapeseed exchange. And that spread, plus whatever premium trading is going on, constantly decides whether they will crush more GM or less GM.
But if we move now a little bit closer and let's take only the Baltic Sea region and crushing capacity inside the Baltic Sea and the production, because a very important part of the price is always the freight and how much goes out from here and how big is the surplus if we need to bring something in, or I don't see that we have a deficit, but what's your numbers there?
The numbers are going to change this year. You can say as a rule of thumb, and this is really broad strokes here, you would say in a good Baltic crop, if we just take the Baltic 3 states, was about 1.5 million. Some years 1.6, some years 1.4. That's like rule of thumb. And then domestic use, so the crush you have here in the 3 Baltic states, 600,000-700,000 tons. So that would give in a good year a total exportable surplus out of Baltics 700,000-800,000 tons. And in a bad year, maybe 150,000 tons less. That's like rule of thumb, broad strokes. A couple of changes this year will be, number one will be that Mistila in Lithuania is opening up a new very big crushing plant. That's going to be the first extraction plant. It's a little technical, but there are different ways to crush the rapeseed and make proteins and oil. The extraction is a more efficient plant, but it's also bigger. So that'll be, as far as I'm informed, a little over 500,000 ton capacity now. And the previous Mistila only had, call it 240,000 ton capacity. And at the same time, Bioventa in Latvia has also announced they want to increase by almost 50% to a couple of 100,000 tons a year. So there'll be more domestic crush and less exports. So that should in theory be good for a Baltic farmer, right? More demand nearby that is not as affected with long freights to send it somewhere else, of course. The issue is that there's enough rapeseed up here this season, and that there is a very, very big crop from these European origins I talked about before, actually also EU, but let's call them Black Sea origins instead. Ukraine has a big crop that is exported primarily out in harvest. Romania last year had a terrible crop, I think 1.2, 1.3 million tons. But this year they're expected somewhere between 2.5 and 3. And they are a big export country as well in harvest.
So basically what you're saying that we might see a very big harvest pressure this year, although farmers have not sold so far basically nothing. At some point it comes to the market, but if you look at the futures at the moment, you don't see the harvest pressure coming because the spread for August, November is not very big one compared with last year when we had less crop coming in.
You say, although the farmers have not sold so much, that's actually one of the big ones because, I was just at a seminar on Tuesday where a very, very skilled analyst called Roy Deverell from Black Silo was showing numbers that said a really, really low farmer selling percentage, not just in rapeseed, but also wheat and everything else, all over Europe. And especially in the Black Sea region, it was really, really low, the percentage. So we have an expected big crop coming. Farmers haven't sold. So when farmers don't sell, crushers can only do one thing. If they can't buy physical rapeseed, they will go and buy Matif. And then they paper crush, as it said. So they crush something they've bought in an exchange. And then the plan is, of course, when the physical goods start to come, when the farmers start to sell, then you sell the futures. So you can expect a big crop coming, a lot of early harvest pressure. We can already now buy goods from these originations, Ukraine, Romania, into European ports. This will then, as I said before, primarily be into the Benelux countries they are offered in, but at significant discounts to Matif, SIFO. So what does that mean? You can then sell FOB Baltics. Well, then it's going to be a significant discount because you have to pay for the freight to go there. So there's a big harvest pressure. If the farmer selling then picks up, if all farmers then suddenly decide the same day we're going to sell, there could be quite some pressure coming in because then the pressure is not going to be on the premiums. Premiums are the price you pay relative to Matif, but you also hit the Matif itself because then all the crushers, when they can start buying physical seed, will then start selling the futures. So there's potentially quite some harvest pressure in the horizon here. And I know that farmers can remember big prices from years back. Farmers are always very good at remembering the good prices. Or the low ones when they're buying. The low ones when they're buying, then they can remember that as well. And all due respect for that, I said, I grew up on a farm myself, I understand. But in my book, if rapeseed on Matif, even if the premiums you may get with your local co-op are not exactly, or your local grain merchant is not, if you look at Matif and think, oh, that's a little bit too big of a discount, then no, number one, there are really big discounts being traded in the open market. And number two, we have a Matif close to 500 euros. And we have a relation right now to wheat, which looks, at least traditionally, quite beneficial for rapeseed. And I did an index chart in a presentation I did the other day, where we looked at how all commodities have developed since, where we just indexed all the main commodities, wheat, corn, crude oil, rapeseed, and so on. And I indexed them all at index 100, 1st of January, 2024. Just the last year and a half, just to see how these commodities have developed. And all of them were, at indexes, trading at indexes below 100, except, of course, rapeseed and rapeseed oil. Rapeseed trades at an index 112, whereas wheat was down at 70-something. So rapeseed is, relatively speaking, to wheat, very well priced right now. And also in absolute numbers, close to 500 euros for rapeseed. I know that there's been years when it's been worse, but in a 10-year history, a Matif at 487 or whatever it's trading today is a pretty good price for rapeseed.
And Timo has also been quite generous in the premium wise as well, because 1 year ago the premiums were for rapeseed really low. So at the moment it's not that low. So maybe some kind of even compared to 5-year average, somewhat above it.
Yeah, if you look at the 5-year average and what the premiums we are paying at the moment for farmers delivered to the board, basis what all is calculated, if it's something list price daily, something like minus 18, 19, which I think are quite aggressive compared what is what you can sell on FOB today. But of course, if you look at only Estonia, then our job is to do that. Not much rapeseed is going out, because if we expect 140, 150,000 metric tons coming, then this is about how much Estonia can crush yearly. Of course, something will be exported anyway, but of course Latvia is very nearby, and we import from Latvia quite a bit every year. But I don't think that there's a big room to let some big boats go out of Estonia. So that is the part of the game here. But earlier Perry mentioned oil. Isn't that rapeseed seeds price driver today is mainly the oil? Because if you look at the meal and expeller prices, this is very stable, and we have this quite volatile rapeseed prices, but it all comes from the oil, and the oil is the thing that goes back and forward all the time.
The easy answer to that question is that it's called soy crushing, but it's called a rapeseed oil mill. And that's because a rapeseed has almost 50% oil content in it, and you crush and come out somewhere in the 40s as a yield when you actually put it through a factory. But when you look at a soybean, it has maybe 18% oil. So that is a protein crop that you can get, I don't know, anywhere between 12 and 15% oil out of. So in that relation, it's obvious that the oil means much more in the rapeseed than oil does in the soy. As you call it, oil share value out of the total product. So yes, oil is for sure the driver, and there are good things and bad things about that. But the main bad thing is, of course, that we still use... You can't get any official statistics about this. Again, well, you can, but they always vary depending on who you ask. But I still think most players say that more than half of all produced rapeseed oil in Europe go to biodiesel. One of the things about biodiesel is that a Mercedes doesn't care if it's eating GM or non-GM. So GM oil goes very well into that. But it also means that when it's replacing mineral oil or going into blends on mineral oil, we are affected by global price swings. A lot of this demand is not affected because it's based on political minimum blends. So it's not very price elastic, as you say in economic theory. But a lot of it is also based on pure cost. So if crude oil prices gets heavily pressured down because the world economic turnover sort of stops. If everybody are expecting, Moody's just downgraded the U.S. Economy, U.S. Consumer expectations are the lowest in ever recorded history right now. So if the market has a general economic downturn, we can often see that in rapeseed oil prices. And that is the threat to rapeseed prices. Because if you use more than half of the total production into biofuels, a Mercedes is more hungry than we are for Mars bars, then that will affect, that can potentially also be a negative price driver. So yes, it's definitely oil.
Yeah, but even though you say like soybean is low in oil content, but soybean oil prices went really low one week ago, and it took the soybean price also with it. And as we saw, that rapeseed during this period also went like really heavily lower. So soybean oil still is also really important one to look out for.
Of course, that's not what I mean. I just meant that it's even more important for rapeseed to look at the things that affect the oil price, which is, for instance, the mineral price, the political ideas we have for blending biofuels and so on, because that the oil price swings has a bigger impact on rapeseed prices than soybean oil price swings have on soybeans.
But if there were some kind of shift, like there's a lot of talk in the US at the moment, like going away from this renewable diesel and biofuel, if those talks were also present in Europe, what kind of rapeseed prices would we see?
Good question. Let's go back in time. I remember a head analyst, I think at the time from Cargill or Bunge, at a big exchange 15 years ago, saying that this is when rapeseed cost, 275 euros or something, said that we're going to see a huge boom in prices when this stuff comes along, this biofuel. And everybody laughed a little bit, actually, said, no, it can't be that bad. And it didn't take many years before the rapeseed prices doubled. So yes, there's certainly a potential for a much less demand, in a period at least, because we see a lot of big trends in the world right now. And I have very hard time seeing that a locally produced commodity that can both yield a very, very good oil, health-wise. I mean, rapeseed oil is some of the healthiest oil you can eat because of the way the fatty acid composition is in the oil. It has numerous usage that a lot of other oils can't. It can take a lot of higher temperatures. If you fry things very high temperatures, for instance, has no trans fatty acids. At the same time as you have a protein that's growing right outside our door that can be used for our own feed for our animals. And there has been no orangutans ripped out of trees or no rainforest cut down in South America to make it. But that doesn't mean that we for some years can have some big swings while the market adapts to new demands, right? But there are constantly new uses of rapeseeds coming in, constantly new stuff. We've seen in the last years that especially some South European producers have started to use rapeseed protein for humans. And this is actually a problem because there are some glycosinolates in the protein part of when you crush the rapeseed, you make an oil part and a protein part. The oil part is what we can fry in or make biodiesel from. The protein is what we've predominantly used for animal feed, mainly into dairy, so into cattle. Because their four stomachs they don't care very much that there's these bitter parts of the rapeseed called glycosinolates in there. But human consumption doesn't like this, and pigs doesn't like this in big quantities. But in recent years, we've figured out that you can use much more in pig feed than you thought before. Much more percentage than you did before. And now more and more companies are starting to use for human consumption as well. So making proteins for humans based on rapeseed is not just in an experimental phase, it is actually happening. And EU just approved a new scheme, actually employed by a Danish producer 2 weeks ago, now accepted more use of rape protein for human consumption. So there's a constant move towards these things growing on our own fields. So I'm quite supportive of, or I'm quite confident that rapeseed will have big support underneath it. But it's clear that if the politicians tomorrow decide that biodiesel are a bad idea, let's cancel the whole thing, then we'll have a huge downswing in rapeseed for some time. But over time, I think we have a very, very sustainable demand, both for the protein and for the oil. It has so many good effects and so little negative press, so to speak, as well.
Yeah, the biodiesel part of total rapeseed oil is huge. So to shut it down completely, I think this is not even physically possible. So But
I suspect it will, but I suspect it will be that the politicians agree on a 5-year program or a 7 or 10-year program, whatever, where they will slowly discontinue the subsidies. I strongly doubt that they come and say, okay, from 1st of Jan 2026, over. That would be a big surprise.
Let's talk a little bit about rapeseed meal as well, because as you said, a lot of rapeseed, if it's crushed, then the outcome is also rapeseed meal. Your opinion about the rapeseed meal prices at the moment, are they overvalued, undervalued, or like okay valued on the market at the moment? And what the farmer maybe should think about fixing ahead or staying in spot prices with rapeseed meal?
I would like to say I don't know, because I'm a rapeseed nerd, and we of course dabble in or trade in proteins as well. But if I've just said that on the rapeseed side of things, with a big crop looming, prices being quite high, rapeseeds being relatively quite expensive compared to other commodities, I would be very hesitant to not have sold anything. I never recommend that you take a decision as a farmer, just put your finger in the air and then suddenly you decide, today I'm going to sell all my rapeseed. But I would always have some plan. I speak a lot when I'm out doing presentations about strategic trading and risk management for farmers. And I would always have a plan how to sell my crops, where I have some specific part sales during a year. But being in a position, like I just said, and not having sold anything, I would not recommend. So if I'm saying that I think there's a potential for lower rapeseed prices, then I would probably not say that you should go and cover as much as you can on your proteins. But since nothing is certain, I always try to give farmers the advice. You constantly, if you are an animal producer, you constantly have to go and buy proteins, inputs for your production. And if you grow plants, you are constantly selling to some extent, right? You're producing something, either if you're not selling, your barn will sooner or later be full. Might take some years, but sooner or later you'll get full. So you're constantly a seller on one product, you're constantly a buyer. If you make a plan, like say 5 dates a year, where you buy or sell 20% of your needs or your crops, same dates every year, then maybe in years where I think the prices are quite high and there's a lot of potential pressure to go lower, maybe I'll sell not 20%, but maybe I'll sell 30% and then hold off and do 10 in the end. Or in years where I think, okay, prices may come lower on the stuff I'm buying, maybe I shouldn't buy 20%, but maybe buy cover 15%, and then wait a little bit and make the last covering percentages 25, whatever. I wouldn't say don't buy any rape meal because the rapeseed prices could come lower, or sell all your rapeseed because the rapeseed could go lower. But I would maybe, let's say, wear the short glasses, seeing that the market might come lower, so I'll try and adapt my buying and my selling to that. Then I'll be a little bit more aggressive in my selling and a little bit more hesitant in my buying. If I then later on feel now the prices have dropped so much that there's a good potential we could see higher, or the rains that we've been promised now, because it is still very dry in northwestern Europe. I know you guys had a lot of rain, especially last weekend here, but we really haven't. I mean, Denmark is dry as a bone, North Germany is dry as a bone, North France is dry as a bone, UK has the driest spring in 120 years. So if they don't get any rain, there could be quite some support for prices, of course. Okay, then we realized our plan was wrong. Then we can adjust the percentages. But it's still not so that I'd sold everything or bought everything. I always would recommend that you split it out, but you'd maybe be a little bit more aggressive in the selling if there's a big crop looming. Maybe a little bit more hesitant on the purchase if there's a big crop looming. That's how I would approach it. I wouldn't try to guess where the market goes, because if any one of us could guess the future, we, with all due respect, would neither be brokers, traders, nor farmers. We'd be sitting in Bahamas with a small little drink with a parasol in, right? We'd just play the lottery once a week and that would be enough.
No, we just wanted to get the answer, is the prices going up or down? So, but you clever way got out of that. But if you look at this, what's going to happen in the market and what are the main things to look out for? This, I think, this biodiesel thing, at least as far as I've read recently, this is not on the cards at the moment that we are going to reduce something. But what has put on the hold for now 90 days or now maybe a little bit less is the US-China trade deal. And if this deal is actually made, and Trump made that also last time when he was the president, and how much US goods were sold to China, then we have like very good potential for the soybeans to go up, and it will also definitely will drag also rapeseed prices up. But vice versa, then we have problem with prices. This is maybe the main thing to watch for at the moment, besides the weather.
Yeah, I mean, our jobs used to be a lot easier than they are now, because you could, at any presentation, say China, weather, funds, and then it depends. If you said those things, you had covered every single presentation always. But, well, first of all, we have some compounded things to what you're saying, because South America is expanding the agricultural area so fast every year. It's literally millions of tons that is added to production every single year. And there's a huge crop coming, potentially. But again, we haven't said the word climate change yet, and we really should, because that's going to be the predominant thing in the coming years. A normal May in Denmark has about, I think, don't shoot me if I'm wrong here, I think about 60 millimeters of rain. A normal May in Argentina has about 100 millimeter. They had 400 millimeters in 24 hours this weekend. Nothing survives 400 millimeters of rain in 24 hours, where it's really heavy hitting.
Yeah, there's a lot of talks that the soybean areas maybe have been hit really hard.
Precisely. So we can sit and we can do all of our nice charts and our tables, and then you get a weather event like that. And then you turn around and you look towards a trade deal. A trade deal requires people to be sensible and understand economic basic theory. And I'm not so certain I would attach those two labels to Mr. Trump or his administration. So we can put all the analysis up we want. If he has a brain fart on Twitter tomorrow, we can go back to the drawing board. I mean, a man who can sit with a straight face and say, Canada is a worse ally to the US than some of all these Mediterranean countries that we've fought wars with, or however it was he was wording it, then all bets are off the table. We can't just say China funds and weather anymore. We can get 400 millimeters of rain one weekend, and the next weekend he says, well, we're going to go back to 145% tariffs. People think that this has stopped. They've been paused for 90 days. Yeah, and the administration said, these 90 days we can do a deal every day, and boom, everything will be happy. They've made one, which I would be very hard-pressed to call a deal with the UK, which only exempts parts of stuff and still remains a basic 10% tariff on goods, with some few exemptions on aluminium and the first 30,000 cars sold and whatever else they try to make as an exemption. But they've only paused the 145 against the 110% tariffs. There's still a 30% tariff right now for everything going in. The American importers, the American retailers have all been out saying, we're going to raise prices, we're going to raise them fast. If inflation then picks up, which is bottom line what increase in prices in the supermarket means, the US economic pace is going to have a downturn.
The interest rates will go up once again, and then it will even more slow down.
And they're right now trying to put a plan through that's going to add 8 trillion to the US national debt. This is de facto going to make them. They're already now paying, I think, I'm not an economist, but I think I read it was it 65% of their total taxes being paid in the US right now is going into paying interest rates on the national debt. If they add another 8 trillion, they're simply not going to be able to run their government. And even if they made the average American believe that they could just come in with Dodge or whatever and take all the waste away, The Guardian has just made a huge analysis of all the so-called savings they've made, and it's a fraction of a percent of what they said they've saved. And there's really a lot of people who were dependent on money from the American government who've been taken off this now. Veterans and handicapped people and whatnot, and if they also cut now on Medicaid, all of these people, when government give to these people, this money doesn't disappear. They go and use that money to live for. So the government doesn't lose very much in giving this. But if they don't have anything, then all of that turnover disappears. And he has now launched what he calls a big, beautiful bill, which is going to be the biggest tax cuts.
It's amazing.
Yes, it's big. Yeah, exactly. It's so amazing. It's going to be the biggest tax cuts ever. And he's going to codify his 2017 tax cuts as well. The American problem is that they don't pay their taxes. It's not that they have a trade deficit on physical goods with individual countries. The US is not a production economy anymore. Just like a lot of our countries are no longer production economies. We're service economies. The US have put tariffs on countries that they have a trade surplus with. If you look at trade as you should, total trade, not just goods. It doesn't matter that we buy the toasters from you for 100 euros if we sell you services for 300 euros. We have a trade surplus. And Trump didn't say that. He just looks at the goods and say, the countries we have a goods deficit with, boom, we put a blanket tariff on, including penguins. Yeah. It's simply wrong economic theory. And if they really cut the American economy more, we're going to see an economic downturn in the world. There's just no way around it. And that will affect our prices, also on commodities, potentially a lot more than even rain and acreages in Romania. So for us, it's really scary. It used to be much easier just saying the China funds and it depends, but we really can't anymore.
Okay, we have talked about politics a little bit, but let's come to EU policies as well. As we know, there are a lot of rules and regulations in agriculture in all over Europe. Do you feel or see that the regulations are maybe gone a little bit too far, that our agricultural producers, for them it's a bit difficult or even hard to produce rapeseed anymore because you have this ban on different insecticides, we don't have any GMOs? Do you feel that there's a limitation in policies for our growth?
I think that I should be very careful what I say now, because I'm from Denmark, which is probably the most regulated country in all of Europe when it comes to agriculture. And we have a lot of players thinking that we need some sort of reduction on what we call the burden of rules on farming. But at the same time, we're also the country in Europe with the smallest amount of nature, with the most polluted inner waters and fjords. I'm a fisherman myself. I like to go on the coast. They did 25 hours, I think it was, of underwater video in the fjord of Vejle, which is an hour's drive away from where I live. And they saw one fish. And there are, efficient is one thing, but it also has to be in some sort of a balance. So yes, I do believe that we have very skilled farmers in Europe. I think we're some of the best there is, and we should give them some very good means for working. But it can't be so that we say it's more important to be able to use, for instance, eternity chemicals in pesticides that will stay in our grounds for 10,000 years minimum, just to be sure to keep the last 0.2% of the yields. So it's a balance for me. But I certainly think that our GM is a place where Europe shot itself in the foot, because we said from the beginning, no. And that means that the development of these crops were made elsewhere. And it was by big corporations, Monsanto being the main one. So instead of us okaying, what if we could create a rapeseed that was a lot more resistant in itself to fungal infection or insects?
Or drought.
For instance, yes. What if we could make that and then save a lot of the chemicals that are, I don't know any farmers who like to ruin the environment. They try to do their job as best as they can. And I fully understand they also have a business to run, for sure, but I think they would much prefer to not have to pay for the pesticide and then put it on the fields, knowing that it also has some negative consequence to the environment. What if the crop could grow without it? That would be much smarter. But in Europe, we said no. So what happened? Monsanto went and made soybean varieties, for instance, that are not good against fungus infection or something else. No. They made stuff that could take 4 times more Roundup, because Monsanto owns the world license for Roundup. So was that smart from Europe? I really don't think so. Much smarter that we had put ourselves in the driver's seat. Today, Europe is really not. We try to do all this CRISPR and genetic selection. We're quite far in that. But the active genetic manipulation, we don't touch at all, because it's still... So there, I would certainly look at the rules if I were in charge. But I'm, as I said, just a rapeseed nerd.
And last question for the end of the show. As you said, the prices are high or okay at least. So would it wise for the farmers to look out for 26 crop rapeseed fixing as well already?
That is actually a super good question, because the what do you call them? New crop, old crop spreads.
Spreads, exactly.
Yeah, have been you have spreads between the individual contracts on Matif. Matif is a futures, and just very quickly for the farmers who don't know why we call it a future, it's simply a bet. We bet on what the price will be in the future, hence the name a future. And the future has an expiry. That's where the bet ends. So if I sell you a May future, we're betting that when we get to May, I'm betting the prices will be lower, then I can buy it back from you lower price. But you're betting the prices will go higher.
Yeah.
So when I buy it back, I have to pay more, right? So these futures have a relation between themselves. In years where there's not enough goods, we see what we call an inverse. That means that the future months that are closer to now are at a higher price because the market really needs the goods right now, but there's not enough goods. Whereas in years where we have a lot of goods, we have what's called a carry. That means that the nearby is cheaper than the deferred, the further into the future. So that means that the market is paying the market players to store the goods because they can't chew them all right now. Now, the most important spread for rapeseed is between May and August every year because that's between crop years. And this year, that spread right now is trading only at that's usually a big inverse because the inverse meaning that it's more expensive on the May because then the crop is almost used, there's not much seed left. And then August is of course where there's most pressure on the prices. So can be quite a big spread. Some years ago, we had 120 euros or 130 euros, I think it was at one point when it was expiring. Now it's only 20 euros. That's not much of a harvest pressure. And the price out there is 460 trading right now. I'm looking at my screen, 466 euros. That's historically speaking a quite decent harvest price also for rapeseed. And I think that the premiums I'm hearing from the big mills, they already now quote premiums for the crop 2026. They also look quite okay. So again, I would never do all my purchase or sales in one go. But if I had my strategy, I might move the first 20 or 10% or whatever of a trend yield minus whatever you dare to sell of your normal crop. I would probably think about putting at least something in the books.
Yeah, it would make sense.
But don't shoot me if it's wrong, of course, because it depends.
Yeah, it depends. Okay, thank you, Per, for being a participant of our show. It was really nice to have you here.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure being here.
Ja head kuulajad, ma arvan, et teile sai nüüd kuulamismaterjali kõvasti, nii et suured tänud teile kuulamast ja uute kohtumisteni.
Tänud kuulamast ja järgmise korrani.
Põllupäevik.